Say, Evelyn, can I ask you a question? You got a moment? Mm-hmm. Which team do you play for?
Well, I'm a peach.
Well, I was just wondering, because I couldn't figure out why you would throw home when we've got a 2-run lead. You let the tying run get on second, and we lost the lead because of you. Now you start using your head. That's that lump that's 3 feet above your ass. Are you crying?
No.
Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
Why don't you leave her alone, Jimmy?
Oh, you zip it, Doris.
While the men are off fighting in World War II, a women's baseball league entertains the nation. This week, we talk about why kids hate turf, how Coca-Cola can cure alcoholism, and when there is crying in baseball. Join us for our very first social distancing episode, where we find out if a league of their own stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of the Test of Time podcast. My name is Alan Noah.
And I'm James Brief. And why is this so special, Al?
Well, it's special and I guess unique in that this is our very first episode that we are not recording while in the same room at the same time. We are practicing good social distancing, and we are recording this over Skype. We occasionally record a few episodes in advance, and so we were able to put out the last few while we recorded together. But now that people are doing isolation and social distancing, we are recording over Skype. And, you know, when we started this podcast, James and I, we each kind of had our own thing. And my thing was that I wanted to do an episode every week and not miss a week, because if we missed 1 week for one reason or another, then we missed 2 weeks, and then we missed 3 weeks, and then we would just kind of, fall off. And James, your thing was that we would record in person, so it would be like a hangout session. It would be fun. But in light of this global pandemic, James, you waived your one rule and agreed to do it over Skype, which I appreciate. And, that way we can keep the podcast going. And is it the most important thing in the world? Not by a very, very long shot right now. But hey, it's a distraction. It's something for us to keep ourselves distracted. It's something for our listeners to have and enjoy. So yeah, we wanted to keep the show going.
I agree. This is not the most important thing in the world, but it is important in some ways for us to do, to alter what we're doing. And we're still hanging out, but not the same way. And, I'll talk a little more about why I made that one rule, because I tell people that I could tell them right now my best times of every single year. I tell people my favorite week of the year is the week I get to be a camp doctor and I go away for a week. My favorite extended weekend of the year is this 4-day weekend every year that I go away with my high school friends and we rent a house in New England and we go away and have a good time together. My favorite weekend of the year is Nick's Marathon, and my favorite day of the year, my single favorite day, is this thing that the Brief kids do called Brother Sister Fun Day, where the Brief boys and girls, there's 4 of us, and we all have an invitation to go to the water park, and as many of us can make it, we'll make it, and we do this every year. And I bring this up because I wanted to have this thing that you and I, a couple of years ago, I said, this is a great way that one of my best friends, like you could come over, we could talk about movies and it's fun. We'll get pizza and we'll play some video games. It's a great like tradition. I didn't want to do it over Skype because then, like you said, the same way that if we didn't do it every week, it was going to go, if we did it by Skype one week, it was going to be by Skype another week, and it would be more of a chore and not necessarily fun. This right now, this is fun. I'm not going to call you, Al, on the telephone and just like talk to you for an hour. So this is what we can do. And I really did want to do this recording when we can video see each other, because even though we're only recording on audio, I still want to see your reaction at certain things.
Yeah, and we were originally planning to record Mulan this week because of the live action Mulan. That got pushed back, so we will do Mulan eventually later in the year when it is released. I originally said we should do Outbreak this week, because that's topical, and you correctly said that was a bad idea. And I thank you, James, for saying that we should not do Outbreak. You were right. That would have just been a bad idea.
I don't think some of the LOL memes about coronavirus, I don't think these jokes are going to age well. I don't think that necessarily talking about Outbreak right now is, maybe in 2 years we can look back on it, but let's see what happens.
Yes, I totally agree. And even though I did suggest it, I don't want to watch Outbreak now. I really don't. And so, I came up with A League of Their Own because Courtney and I were just flipping through the channels the other night and saw that it was on Epix. Yes, I still do pay for cable. I know that's weird. But I was like, oh, that's perfect because that has nothing to do with viruses. That's just a fun movie. And then after I said to you, James, that we should watch it, I was thinking about it and I was like, well, this kind of is sort of tied to coronavirus because it stars Tom Hanks, who has announced that he tested positive, and it's about baseball, and the professional baseball season has been delayed, and that would be starting right about now. But you know what? The movie itself has nothing to do with that, and it's just a fun movie to watch and a fun movie to talk about. So let's just get into the movie, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just talk about a fun movie from, not necessarily a fun time in America, World War II, but this is a very lighthearted film about that era. A League of Their Own is based on a true story movie about a professional all-female baseball league. So while the men served in World War II, sisters Dottie Hinson, Gina Davis, and Kit Keller, Lori Petty, they're recruited to play for the Rockford Peaches. Under the direction of their often drunk former professional baseball player, Coach Jimmy Dugan, played by Tom Hanks, the girls learn about their love for baseball and each other.
Aww. Now, I remember seeing this in the movie theater when it came out, and I seem to recall that it was at least moderately successful.
Actually, this is quite a groundbreaking film because budget was $40 million, very decent budget for 1992. Not huge, but, this is not an indie film. And it opened on July 3rd, 1992. It opened at number 2 with $13.7 million, just beating out number 3 Boomerang, which had $13.6 million. And the formerly reviewed Sister Act was in at number 4. But the number 1 movie that it couldn't beat in its 3rd week at number 1, it's a film from 1992. Al, you liked this film, and I didn't.
Well, I kind of cheated in that I looked this up before, so I think I know. Is it Batman Returns?
Yeah, it is.
Did I say that stands the test of time?
Actually, I'm sorry. I believe you said Batman does, I didn't, and then we both said no to the rest of the films. But I think we both said, it had its charms. But it wound up having $107 million domestic, and guess how much it made worldwide?
47,000 million quadrillion dollars and 11 cents.
No. The reason I asked that is because it's very strange because this was quite a hit and the film made $107 million domestically, but it only made $132 million worldwide. But if you really think about it, this is pretty uniquely an American story that would really only appeal to Americans. A lot of countries maybe where they would be like, why wouldn't they let women play? So I just found that interesting. Like they probably wouldn't make a film like this today that would not have any international draw. But speaking of the 107 million, Penny Marshall, the director, she's the first female director to have ever had a movie earn over $100 million at the box office.
The first Penny Marshall movie that crossed $100 million at the box office isn't A League of Their Own. It's Big, which I know because you told me in our 100th episode way back when. And Penny Marshall became not only the first female director to have a movie earn over $100 million at the box office, she was also the first director to have two movies earn over $100 million at the box office, Big and then A League of Their Own.
You're absolutely right. She broke the record with Big. You're absolutely correct.
I mean, I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't told me. I mean, you're the box office guru. I wouldn't have just, pulled that information out of nowhere. And it's not surprising that Penny Marshall directs the movie and she cast Gary Marshall in the movie, not as like a star, I guess, but he has a fairly substantial role.
There's a lot of repeat casts that obviously Tom Hanks being one of them, but there's people that she likes working with. And for me, I think I saw this in the movie theater, and you said you did as well, but it's been probably 20 years since I saw this film, so I forgot that the film actually is kind of bookended in the present. I kind of remember that it ends in the present, but I forgot that there's a whole beginning, and I think the entire beginning is completely useless.
I mean, that's fair. I will say that the actress who plays the Gina Davis role, but older in the quote-unquote present of 1992, looks a lot like Gina Davis. I had a moment where I was like, wait, is that Gina Davis in makeup? And it's not. It's a different actor, but she definitely bears a strong resemblance to Gina Davis. I do also just want to point out that the theme song that is played over the opening credits is Now and Forever, sung by Carole King, making it 2 weeks in a row that we've talked about movies where the theme song is sung by Carole King. That was not intentional, but there you go.
Which of these songs would have had a good chance of being in that Carole King musical? The other film we're referring to is what film, Al?
The Care Bears movie. I think this one has a better chance of being in the Broadway musical. This is a much better song.
I don't know. I mean, Care a Lot was a pretty decent song.
Not really. But we go back to the World War II era, to 1943, and we see these two sisters, Dottie Hinson and Kit Keller. They have different last names because Dottie is married and she's taken her husband's last name. And they are playing baseball in some kind of small town game. And someone is watching them. It's a scout. This character is played by John Lovitz. And he is basically just as obnoxious and sarcastic as can be. He's trying to recruit Dottie to join this new league of women baseball players. And his pitch is that they would pay her $75 a week. And then Dottie's like, well, I only make $30 on the farm. And he says, well, that would be more. And that was not a very good John Lovitz impression, but you can imagine him saying it in that voice.
They'll pay you $75 a week.
We only make 30 at the dairy.
Well then, this would be more, wouldn't it? You interested?
Oh, his lines were fantastic, and he's just such a jerk, but in such a John Lovitz funny way, just going to one other guy, if I had your job, I'd kill myself. And at one point he just says, I'm going home to give the wife a little pickle tickle. And I read that John Lovitz's character, you later see his picture like memorialized in the Hall of Fame, and you might wonder like, he's only in the film for like the first 10 minutes, and apparently he had a much larger role in the film, but the director, once it was done, there was such a strong reaction. He apparently filmed like 15 minutes of just riffing on these people, and they were cracking up, and it was great. But I think in a wise decision, she only cut it down to like the hysterical lines that were like testing very well with the audiences, and I think it works well. You didn't need him later because he was very funny in this scene.
Yes. And he is kind of saying that the league that he's building, he needs women who can play baseball. And not only that, they need to be pretty. And Gina Davis and Lori Petty, these two sisters, are both attractive, so they're in. And then on their way to Chicago, they stop in Colorado to pick up another player, Marla, who is a phenomenal baseball player, but not attractive in the classical sense. And like her dad has to like basically beg John Lovitz to take her. And it's just one of those things where, yeah, she's not conventionally pretty, but like she's an amazing ball player. You'd be crazy to not want her in your baseball league. And I watched this movie with my kids, and, you know, I kind of use this as a teachable moment where, as a father, I want to say to my kids, hey, isn't that dumb? They're putting together a baseball league. You want people who are good at baseball. Who cares about what they look like?
Yeah, you know, some of these women are obviously beautiful women. Gina Davis is beautiful. And there is even a hint by John Lovitz that Lori Petty is more of kind of like a tomboyish, but she's still, she's okay enough. But Marla, certainly, he was hesitant. Actually, he says no just because of that. But to be honest, she's not Gina Davis, but she's still Hollywood ugly. Like, I mean, honestly, I mean, they did a good job. You see this woman hitting like home runs and smashing the window like over and over and over, and you purposely can't see her face. I was kind of like wondering when I'm going to see it. And when I saw it, I was kind of like, that's it? Like, she's not a model, but she's still fine.
Right. And of course, it's also kind of funny that John Lovitz is being this like arbiter of who's attractive when, no offense, Mr. Lovitz, if you're listening, but he's not exactly the most handsome guy in the world. They get her on the team because Dottie and Kit refuse to go to Chicago without her. John Lovitz brings her along, so they all go to Chicago. We meet some more of the women trying out for the league, including Doris and May. Doris is played by Rosie O'Donnell, and May is played by Madonna.
Yeah, and you know, here's another interesting casting, because Doris, she was originally going to be like another Madonna character, like another promiscuous woman, but they scaled that back. And I don't think Marla is any less attractive than Rosie O'Donnell. I don't mean that bad about either woman. I just, you know, they're average American women, you know?
And anyone next to Madonna and Gina Davis in 1992 is going to look, you know, homely by comparison. I did just want to point out that May, Madonna's character, they say she was a taxi dancer, and I had no idea what that was, so I Googled it, and basically it was a dancer that you could hire at a club. It sounds kind of like a strip club dancer, but it's not. It was just like at a dance club, and if you were a gentleman who didn't have anyone to dance with, you would pay these women per dance, and they would dance with you, which I did not know that was a thing. So there you go. A little 1940s trivia for you.
Yeah, but she implies, especially when she's crying later, how she's not going to go back to being a taxi dancer. This really is not like a ballroom dancing partner for hire. It seems like these are probably pretty sleazy guys, and this is not a fun job.
Yes.
But she's happy to be on this team with these girls, and there is a little in-joke that you have to know this is played by Madonna. I think it makes it more interesting because I think this is around the time that Madonna released that book Sex, right? Because we were like 11 years old or whatever, so like we knew this book existed. I never saw it, did you?
Maybe. I definitely saw her in Playboy. And yeah, I mean, there is that one line in the movie when Doris says something to her about like, you think there's any men in this country that ain't seen your bosoms? Which is funny for the character May, but also for the actor Madonna. It works on two levels.
That's right. You know, I actually do remember that there was one time when my friends and I, we were in a bookstore and they actually had the Madonna book on display. And I was actually, oh my God, we should look in. And we looked like for 1 second before someone shooed us away. So then we meet the usually drunk coach for these ladies, Jimmy Dugan. He's played by Tom Hanks, and he is so well cast in this film.
Yeah, he is phenomenal. He has top billing in the movie, which I get it because, he's the biggest name and that makes sense in 1992. But I mean, he's not the main character in the movie. It's really the story of Dottie and Kit. He doesn't even show up for the first, 20, 30 minutes or so. It's not really his story. But he is basically recruited by this guy, Harvey, who owns the league. It's really supposed to be Wrigley, who owned the Cubs, as in Wrigley Field. And that's Gary Marshall's character. But Dugan is this washed up former ball player who has just really pissed his life away because he's an alcoholic. And he tells Harvey that he's quit drinking and he doesn't do that anymore. But we very quickly find out that's not true when he goes to meet the girls. And the first thing he does is stumble into the locker room and just pees for like a comically long time. My kids thought that was hilarious, just like the sound of him peeing for a really long time. It sort of reminded me of that joke in Austin Powers when he starts peeing after he's like thawed out from the hibernation. It's a simple gag, but definitely makes kids laugh for what it's worth.
Oh, it was very funny. I thought of Adam Sandler's bit on his comedy CD, The Longest Pee.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, I also love, like, early on when he's quote unquote coaching the game, but like not at all because he's passed out during the entire game, and Dottie is really taking control and she's coming up with the lineup and she's basically acting as the manager. One of the baseball executives is like giving Dugan a hard time and he's like, you had that one great move when you scratched your balls for an hour. And then he says, well, hey, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And once again, I got to tell you, my 10-year-old son was just rolling on the floor at that. He thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard.
Did you notice that the league is called the AGPBL? It's the American Girls Professional Baseball League. They don't even call it the women or even the ladies. It's girls. That definitely caught my ear.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're definitely making them appear as girly girls. I mean, that is a recurring theme in the movie. They have etiquette classes. They have to learn how to sip their tea like a lady. They have to wear these ridiculous skirts to play baseball. And immediately, as you're watching this, you're like, that's a horrible idea. They're going to get really hurt. My son, who plays Little League, was like, yeah, they're going to get hurt anytime they slide. And they show you that in the movie where one of the players slides into third or whatever and gets a horrible, nasty rash on her thigh because of course she does. She's wearing a skirt. I mean, it's just insane. All of the team names are like Peaches and I forget what some of the other ones are, but they go from oven mitts to baseball mitts is a headline you see at one point. Dottie, Gina Davis's character, gets attention for the team by making a catch, not just like as the catcher that she is, but by doing a split as she makes the catch, throwing some femininity in with it. So that gets attention. And it seemingly works because that brings crowds into the stadium and that brings them fans.
Well, I kind of got the impression that, yeah, there was some stuff like they would have these promotions, catch a foul ball, get a kiss. But it turns out it's a decent game of baseball that they're playing, too. And I think they're starting to get fans. I think based on both. Let's be honest, it's both. But I think they're giving them a real, honest, good game.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do have these sort of unique problems that you don't have in, men's Major League Baseball, where they have a chaperone and they're not allowed to drink and smoke and go out and dance, but they kind of quote unquote poison the chaperone, where they just give her something where she's throwing up so they can sneak out and have a good time. One of the players has a son that hangs out with them on the tour bus, and he's a little nightmare. Stillwell is his name. At one point, Stillwell eats the lineup, which I thought was pretty funny. There's one moment where the girls are playing and an African American woman grabs a ball that was hit foul and she throws it into the other characters who are playing baseball. And it's this little moment of recognition that it's only the white women who are getting their moment to shine because it's still the 1940s. And in my research today, I saw that woman who throws the ball in, it's a reference to Mamie Johnson, who was an African-American baseball player who pitched in the Negro Leagues. I appreciated that the movie took a minute to just kind of acknowledge that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that the movie does well. This is not your typical sports film where they're a bad team and then they do well. It seems the Rockford Peaches are always pretty talented and they were kind of destined to always make the championship. But it's more how they bond with each other, how the coach winds up getting a little better. Like you were saying, he was barely interested at first, and he kind of wakes up when I think it's Dottie hits like a home run or something, and he's like, a woman could play, because he doesn't even refer to them as ball players. And to be fair, that he was kind of sold that he's only just supposed to be there because he's a brand name. And he comes out, waves his hand for a minute, but he starts getting a little more interested and he starts bonding a little bit with Dottie. He starts something so disgusting from the old days is chewing tobacco, and that's what the old Major League Baseball players used to do. But something that to us was, when we were kids, was a reference to the old timers, but is gone now. Do you remember, Al, a gum when we were kids called Big League Chew?
You are clearly not a father if you think that Big League Chew doesn't exist. It does exist. On my son's Little League team, all they want is Big League Chew. They can't get enough of it. One of the fields that we play on is actually turf, and it's like so cool to play on the turf field. Like it's great. But like the one rule is that if you play on the turf field, you can't chew gum because, the turf is expensive and they don't want kids to like ruin it by like spitting their gum. And they hate it for that reason, because that means they can't have their Big League Chew. So yes, I know what Big League Chew is, and it is still very much a thing today.
Wait, well, one thing, Al, you're a father?
Oh yeah, have I not mentioned that?
No, you haven't mentioned it. We can't mention A League of Their Own without mentioning what actually winds up in, I believe it's the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes. This was the number 54 all-time greatest movie quote. So what of course am I talking about, Al?
Well, you're talking about the line when Dugan is yelling at one of the players and she starts crying and he says, "There's no crying in baseball." And it's such an iconic line. My kids knew that line even before they'd watched the movie because they've just heard me say it. And not as a father, but as a Little League assistant coach, I can tell you that there's plenty of crying in Little League because, the kids get upset, they lose the game, they strike out or whatever. There's lots of crying. There is also sometimes crying in Major League Baseball. You remember Wilmer Flores?
No, I don't.
He was that Mets player who a few years back, he thought that he had been traded from the Mets during a game, and you could see him like choking up, like he was crying on the field because he thought he was traded from the Mets. And, some people made fun of him for it. Some people said, man, that's kind of what you want in a player who like loves his team so much that he would cry if he was being traded. It turned out he wasn't traded, and he was reacting to like some false rumor. But yeah, that was a real thing.
Yeah, I do remember that, actually. There's also another fun scene, or they're on the bus, and Jimmy and Dottie, they're kind of bonding, and she's talking about her husband, and she's asking her, well, how come you're not in the war? And we find out that he was an alcoholic, and he was a superstar. I mean, he would have been one of the greats of all time, but he kind of cut his career short because of his drinking, and he apparently fell out of a hotel window at some point and destroyed his knee, and maybe through the surgery or whatever they did, he had no cartilage, and he apparently could not fight in World War II. And, he's he's even a little bit embarrassed by this because he's like, what? I can pull a trigger. You hear about these things, the flat feet and the bone spurs and these things that's when there's a draft army, there's certain things that are on a list of reasons why they won't take you. And he kind of feels bad about it. But Dottie winds up talking to him and she gives him a Coke. He wants a beer or he wants to take a swig of his hooch. She gives him a Coke. And I thought it was a little bit glossing over, like, it's not that the alcoholic hasn't found a delicious beverage, but it was kind of cute in that, like, he's found a friend and maybe he doesn't need to, like, totally drink all the time. But it's just overall fun scene because the two of them they have great chemistry.
They do, and I do think you're factually wrong about that. I do believe that Coke cures alcoholism. If you just have a swig of delicious Coca-Cola, you will no longer be an alcoholic. Although maybe it only works if it's Coke in the bottle. It doesn't work if it's in a can.
Or maybe it only works if it's old Coke with cocaine in it, so that it's like, you don't need alcohol, you need cocaine. And then you suddenly get addicted to that. So it could be a number of things.
Yeah. Well, this movie does sort of touch on some of the serious topics of the time. Speaking of the war, Dottie's husband Bob is away in the war. A few of the other players have husbands that are overseas. And there's a really emotional scene when someone from the army comes in with a telegram to deliver heartbreaking news, but then is like, oh, wait, I can't figure out who it's for. I'll have to leave and come back later, which is like awful on so many levels that like all of these women are like, well, who is it? And Dugan like rightfully grabs the envelope out of his hand and opens it because no one could think about anything else until they know who it is. And you think maybe it's going to be Dottie. It's not. It's another player named Betty. And she's a fairly minor character, but, you know, when she starts crying, you really feel it. I mean, she just found out that her husband died. In the next scene, Dottie is crying, even though her husband's okay. You know, she's still worried about him. And then Bob does show up. He is back from the war. It's Bill Pullman, who we saw in Independence Day. And have we seen him in anything else, in any other movies?
Al, I believe we saw him in a certain Lone Star role.
Of course, right. He is in Spaceballs. Shame on me. I'm embarrassed. I forgot about Spaceballs. And he shows up and Dottie's basically ready to like quit because she has been having these huge fights with her sister Kit. And it's a recurring theme throughout the movie that Kit is kind of jealous of her. And the only reason that Kit is even in the league is because John Lovitz's character said, well, you can come too, Kit, if you bring your sister Dottie. So Kit really feels like secondary to Dottie, and Dottie was ready to quit the team earlier. You know, she's like, I can't be on the same team with my sister. So then Kit gets traded, which was not what Dottie wanted. Dottie wanted that she would get traded and not Kit. And even though Dottie's team, the Peaches, has made it to the playoffs, she's still ready to just walk away and leave. And she actually does. She drives Bob home, which I did think was a little bit weird that she was going to drive him, because I was like, in the 1940s, would the woman drive? And Bob was injured in the war, like his foot was injured. So I thought, well, maybe that explains it.
No, that's exactly what it was. His foot is injured. He can't go on the gas. That's what it was.
Gotcha. Also, just one question about the playoffs. There's only 4 teams in this league. So don't they all make the playoffs?
That's true. But maybe it's like one of those little league things where everyone makes the playoffs, you know? But probably it's more of the formality, and I guess the number 4 plays number 1, and then 2 and 3 play each other for the playoffs. Just more of a ranking system.
And then the World Series is a best of 7 series. I mean, I don't know how long the regular season is, but it's just kind of funny that the World Series is between half of the league.
Yeah, and it also works out well that Dottie does wind up showing up for the last game, but it's a good thing the Peaches came back from like a 3-2 deficit in games to tie it up, that the series didn't end in 4, 5, or 6 games.
Yeah, and it is also like kind of rude that she just shows up and like assumes she's going to be catching. Dugan even says like, well, we've had another player who's been catching all 6 other games of the World Series, and you just show up and like expect to take over. And she's like, kind of. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, I think Dottie should have shown up to game 1. But for dramatic purposes, game 7.
Right. Now it's sister against sister because Kit has been traded to this other team, and Dottie has never been easy on her sister. She wants to win, and it all comes down to the bottom of the ninth. Kit is up. Dottie is catching. She tells the pitcher to throw high because Kit can't resist swinging at the high pitches, even though she can't hit them. And the first 2 high pitches, Kit swings and misses. But on the third one, she connects and she goes for an inside the park home run. And it all comes down to this epic play at the plate, sister versus sister.
Yeah, and probably one of the most exciting plays that happens in baseball, since baseball is by its design a non-contact sport, is this play at home plate. And essentially, there's not a force at home, meaning the catcher has to actually catch the ball and then touch the player with the ball in their mitt before they touch the home plate. And if they collide with each other, then the rule is that the catcher has to maintain possession, sort of like American football. They show this play earlier in the league that Gina Davis is able to hold on. I don't know if you caught that, but she's able to do this play, and she's tackled, and she's still holding on to the ball. So the umpire says out. And this one, of course, it's Kit. And Kit had also just pitched a horrible top of the 9th inning. Kit is going a little bit nuts, and she gets up at bat, and, poor Kit, she has to be the one that it's, tying run is on base, the go-ahead run is at bat, and she hits a beautiful shot into, I don't know, deep left or deep right, and the tying run comes in, and the third base coach tells Kit to hold because the throw is going in. She's not going to beat that throw. And Kit totally ignores the third base coach, and she runs in elbow first and collides with her sister, and she touches home plate, and Dottie lands on her back, but this time, as opposed to earlier in the movie, this time her fist goes open and she drops the ball. So Kit is safe, and Racine beats Rockford.
So do you think that Dottie dropped that ball on purpose?
Yes, I do. I do. And I remember thinking maybe she did, or maybe it was ambiguous, because I remember this from 20 years ago. But I watched it this time, and I have no doubt that she dropped it on purpose. There's a long look at Dottie looking at Kit's misery, and Dottie cares about the teammates, she cares about the sport, she cares about doing her best, and she cares about, not letting people be bullied and that stuff. She doesn't care about beating her sister and the victory. And poor Kit has never been the prettier sister. She's not the taller, beautiful one. She's not married. They call her at one point the very single sister. I think she totally just gives it to her.
My son said that too, that she dropped it on purpose. It's not explicitly made clear, but I think it's very strongly hinted that she did the right thing for her sister. And that's sort of where that portion of the story ends. We go back to the quote-unquote present, where all of these women are in Cooperstown and they are inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a nice reunion for all of them. They talk about their husbands and their lives and what they've been up to. Stillwell, the annoying kid, is there. And I forgot that this actor was in this movie, but it is Francis from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. As a respectable gentleman at this point, he says his mother had died, but he felt like he needed to be there to do the right thing and represent her.
Yeah, this actor has 3 of the best lines in the movie history almost. Isn't that right? Pee-wee. He has a lot of great lines in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. He's got a great line in this one that got stuck in my head all day. The "you're gonna lose." I mean, he's imitating himself as a kid, but do you know what his greatest line that I'm thinking of? Do you know the third movie that we've seen him from?
Of course I do. You don't give me credit. You insult me, James. It's Enrico Palazzo.
Yeah, that's from The Naked Gun. When he appears in films, I pay attention.
Exactly. And there's a reunion between Kit and Dottie, which they sort of make it seem like they haven't seen each other in ages, which is a little weird. I mean, they're sisters. You would think they get together at Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever.
Right, and Dottie meets Doris and May, the Rosie O'Donnell and Madonna characters, and she mentions that her husband, the Bill Pullman character, he died this past winter. So at the very least, wouldn't Kit have seen her sister like 3 months earlier? Because this is like the spring.
Oh, at the funeral.
Right. I mean, apparently they stayed together, these guys, from 1940, probably before he went to war, 1940 until 1991, 50 years. I mean, they didn't see him at the 50th anniversary and the funeral. It was a little odd.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they're sisters and they don't always get along, but they do love each other. And yeah, if your sister's husband of 50 years dies, you show up to the funeral. That's a very, very good point. But yeah, then the movie ends. You see some women playing baseball at that field in Cooperstown. It's not the actors from the movie, though. It is the actual players from the 1940s.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Another thing with the credits, I always love looking at these credits to see who we can recognize. Did you catch it? There's only one person there.
No, there were two. One is Taya Leone. I think she's a player on one of the other teams. But Harry Shearer is the voice of the newscaster in this movie.
Oh, that's right. Actually, I noticed it's actually T. Leone. They don't have that accent on hers. And when I saw it on IMDb, it actually says credited as T. Leone.
Oh, that's really funny. Someone should have gotten fired for that. So that's the end of the movie. James, do you think A League of Their Own stands the test of time?
We've talked about period films in and of themselves. Obviously, it's a World War II film, and as far as I know, it was historically accurate for World War II. I can't nitpick anything there. The interesting thing, though, is that this is bookended on what is supposed to be, quote unquote, present day. And there's a part where May throws the baseball at old Dottie's character. She still catches it in the palm of her hand. I'm almost thinking it's her arthritis. You can't throw a fastball at her age. But the overall story of the film, it's fantastic. I think it's very well done. I don't like by the numbers, like, girl is bullied by boy, and he goes, oh yeah, I could do it better than you, and beats the boy at the exact same game. Like, I liked films like Wildcats, where she's just, actually, in that case, she's just a better coach. There's no gimmick. And in this film, there is hints of the sexism, and, they're not going to change the world. And they say, yeah, this league folds in like a decade. Like, it's not going to compete with the Major League Baseball. We know this since we're watching it in the 90s. There is no women's professional baseball league. So I think it's a very well done film. It touches on a lot of points. The telegram scene is so good. The outfits are great in terms of everyone in the stands and all these, the Navy boys, and everyone has a great outfit. The men in their seersucker suits. It's a really fun period film, really brings you into the 40s. And it's a side of World War II we don't get to watch, which is nicer. You don't have to have, all that World War II stuff. Kind of reminded me a little bit of another film I'd really like to review one day, Biloxi Blues. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
No, I don't think so.
But that aside, the direction is fantastic. It's a 2-hour movie. I would have cut out pretty much the entire prologue. It's unnecessary. Even the back end's a little bit too long, I think. But otherwise, it would just kind of be like, here's a story of 1943, and then would have faded to black and would have said, the league lasted another 9 years. I wasn't impressed by those parts. Overall, the film is great. Hanks is fantastic. Gina Davis is so good. And we haven't reviewed things by her. We're obviously going to review eventually her other film, which is seen more as the iconic feminist film, Thelma and Louise. I forgot how good she is because I haven't seen her in enough things. Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, all the supporting characters are very good. There's really not much fault I can make in this film. A little bit of the pacing. Gina Davis was nominated for a Golden Globe. Apparently this film was preserved in the United States National Film Registry, maybe more for its like Americana historicalness than it being like, one of those 100 films we must preserve for all time. It's just a real fun film. But one thing that didn't stand up, there was a short-lived series that was based off of the film that aired for like 5 episodes. And like 5 of the people reprised their role. Gary Marshall, Megan Cavanaugh, Tracy Reiner, and John Lovitz. They all came back. But this was a finished story. We didn't need to see the second season. So for me, it stands on its own, stands the test of time. What do you think, Al? A League of Their Own. Does it stand the test of time? And would you make a podcast about this?
Well, yes. I mean, I am making a podcast about it right now with you. You're here too. I mean, not here, but you know what I mean. What you were saying about the TV show, they have talked about doing a new series for Amazon based on A League of Their Own. I don't believe it started filming, but it was going to star Darcy Carden from The Good Place and Abby Jacobson from Broad City. So it could potentially be made into a series that would presumably be better than that one that only lasted for 5 episodes way back when. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, the cast in this movie is just phenomenal. All of the big names, you know, Tom Hanks, Gina Davis, like you mentioned. You didn't mention that we did see Gina Davis in Beetlejuice, by the way. And yes, we will review Thelma and Louise. I also really want to do The Long Kiss Goodnight at some point. That could be a really interesting episode. But she's phenomenal. Also, just a lot of the other lesser known names that are in this movie. Lori Petty, who plays Kit, I think she's phenomenal. I mean, she hasn't done a ton of other things. She's certainly not an A-list actor, but she's great in this movie. She has a lot of like heavy lifting to do in here. The woman who plays Betty, Tracy Reiner, who, has to really carry that scene of losing her husband, she does a great job. And Cusack is on the team. She's a sister to John and Joan Cusack. There's just a lot of really great, talented people all around in this movie. The story is really interesting. I think a lot of the themes are still really relevant about sexism and how people just assume that girls can't do something even as they watch them do the thing that they say they can't do. It's a great story about 2 sisters who fight and bicker but love each other dearly. It's an Americana story. It's a baseball story. It's really just firing on all cylinders. I really enjoyed this movie. My kids really enjoyed it as well. It's a no-brainer for me that this movie definitely stands the test of time.
Lori Petty, I will just say that she was given a shot at being an A-list star. She starred in, it was a big Hollywood movie. Do you know what her headlining film was?
I don't know. I did just click on her IMDb, and she was in Point Break, a pretty big lead in Point Break.
Well, she had a big role in Point Break, but her big, starring Lori Petty was this movie. It was based on an indie, underground comic called Tank Girl. Do you remember that film?
Yes, I do.
It was a big flop, and I never saw the film, so I can't comment on its merit, but I think that was what happened to her. I think that was her big shot, and I'm just talking Hollywood politics. It seems to be what happened to her, because she's very good in this film. I agree with you.
She was on Orange is the New Black for several seasons, for what that's worth.
No, you're right. I watched a couple seasons of that series, and she was good in that.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. Our very first social distancing podcast. I think it went okay.
This is kind of getting a little back into the routine. It's fun. You have to have some fun.
Yes, it was good seeing you over Skype. I'm sorry we can't just, end the podcast recording and then play video games, but we'll get back to that eventually. Join us next week when we will talk about The Prince of Egypt, because Passover is going to be starting soon. So let's talk about a Passover cartoon movie.
Yeah, let's talk about The Prince of Egypt, Val Kilmer as both God and Moses.
Whoa. In the meantime, we want to hear how you're doing in this whole corona craziness. Tweet at us at Test of Time Pod, or find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. I do want to give a special shout out to our listener, Roy Swanson, who wrote us on Twitter after I posted our Private Parts episode. And he said, I have no particular interest in this specific episode, but the podcast is great. And I put emphasis on great because he wrote that all in caps. Well, Roy, thank you so much for saying that. Really appreciate that. That's just the best kind of feedback. So thank you, Roy, and thank you to everyone who listens and talks to us on social media. And yeah, stay safe out there, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.